We all know that childhood is supposed to be an age of innocence and fun, right? Well, not necessarily. Some youngsters sadly end up taking up a life of crime, choosing a rather dark path to adulthood. For that matter, in this video, we will list a few of the scariest and most dangerous kids in the world. Amarjit Sadar. In the state of Bihar, India, Amarjit comes from a background of extreme poverty in a poor household. There is no data concerning his birthday, and the first incident that is known to have taken place and apparently started Amarjit's criminal career was in 2006, when he was only 8 years old and murdered his 6-month-old cousin, bashing her head with some kind of rock. He then went shockingly further to heartlessly kill his own sister, who was only 8 months old at the time. What is unsettling is the fact that Amarjit's own family and some other villagers and neighbors were aware of both killings, but due to the region's culture, they considered the incidents as a family matter, and the crimes were not reported to the police. With that remark and facing such impunity, it is safe to say that Amarjit felt free to continue with his troubling behavior. It was then, in 2007, when the boy struck again, this time killing his neighbor's young daughter. The girl's mother left her in the village's primary school to sleep while she took care of her chores, but when she returned to take the kid back home, her daughter wasn't there anymore. Villagers quickly associated the girl's disappearance with Amarjit and went after the boy to confirm if he indeed had any involvement in the matter. As soon as the boy was confronted, he was apparently proud of his actions, happily telling the gruesome story of how he killed the child and taking his neighbors to the pit in which he buried his victim. To the police, Amarjit said that he laid the girl on the floor before smashing her face with a brick. Later, he covered the body in grass, coming back home as if nothing happened. According to his testimony, his 3 murders occurred in a very similar way, if not identical. It is believed that Amarjit had strangled his victims, possibly killing them like that before bashing their heads. However, since his previous crimes weren't reported and no official investigation was made, the history was all very blurred. But even so, Amarjit did get arrested for the 3rd murder on May 30th, 2007. According to police officers, when Amarjit was asked about his killings, he simply smiled and asked for cookies in order to tell the story. He was later evaluated by professionals who claimed that the boy suffered from serious psychiatric problems, more specifically a conduct disorder, which leads to disturbing, violent, and dangerous behaviors, making the victim act in a truly sadistic way, showing no kind of suffering, remorse, or embarrassment in the face of his own acts, and actually getting satisfied by hurting people. With that being said, Amarjit didn't have a sense of right or wrong when he committed those murders. At the end, he was accused of homicide and judged as a juvenile. Nevertheless, his status today is unknown, since according to the Indian law, Amarjit couldn't be locked up for more than 3 years. From what we know, he could be in a mental health institution or simply wandering around. Let's just hope that the latter possibility is just a theory. Jarrell Milton. On June 29, 2015, drug dealers Charles Fisher and Jamie Mel Ray, who were 30 and 31 years old respectively, arranged a meeting at Miller Park in North Omaha, Nebraska, to sell some drugs. An expected simple transaction turned out to be chaotic, as they were ambushed and assaulted by 3 youngsters as they got to the park. Ray was shot in the head and neck and died on the spot, while Fisher survived with a shot in his shoulder and was quickly taken to the hospital as soon as the police arrived. The description would be fitting to any recurrent crime that we hear in the news every day if it wasn't for the chilling fact that those 3 criminals were young boys. 15-year-old Shatavius Primes Willis, 17-year-old Jamar Milton, and 12-year-old Jarrell Milton, Jamar's younger brother. Whilst the 2 older boys got arrested as suspects after a police investigation, Jarrell managed to escape and run away. At the time of this incident, there were several gangs spread all over Omaha, which elevated the number of violent crimes in the city to the most critical level. The police believed that each of the boys carried a gun in the attack, and that they were members of the so-called Nike Street Gang, in which members were identified by wearing the Nike symbol. The police spent a week going after Jarrell, even offering a $25,000 reward for any lead to him. 7 days later, on the 7th of July, the police received information stating that Jarrell was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, almost 640 kilometers away from Omaha. Milton was then captured on that same day, close to an apartment in which some of his relatives lived, seemingly scared and unsteady, according to his aunt. When we look at the facts, we wonder what could have led a 12-year-old to this point. But once we glimpse the early years of Jarrell's life, it's not exactly hard to find out. Born in a neighborhood with an alarming rate of criminality, Jarrell is the youngest of Leanna Moss and Javaris Milton's 7 children. Leanna practically raised them all by herself, considering that Javaris was an active member of a gang and was imprisoned with a life sentence since 2010 after killing his own cousin in a robbery that went wrong. However, Leanna also got arrested when Jarrell was only 4, resulting in the kids being sent to an adoptive home. Without a role model to to follow, and living in a place sunken in the crime and drug world, the boys didn't have a place to escape, and it also became their lifestyle. This wasn't even the first incident involving Jarrell. In 2013, he was caught on camera stealing some candy in a convenience store in the region. After Jarrell was captured, Javaris gave an interview straight from prison in an attempt to defend his son. He said that Jarrell was indeed present during the shooting, but didn't shoot anyone, claiming for himself the responsibility of the crime as being a bad example for his kids, not being present nor a good father.
I take blame for what happened, because the way I raised them and the things that I have, I did a lot of wrong, and I was young, I was stupid, and I was raising kids while I was a kid.
As it was determined by the then adjusted law in the state of Nebraska, Jarrell ended up in a juvenile trial because of his age. He was accused of a minor crime with a charge on a robbery attempt. Since he indeed didn't pull any trigger, he was sent to a youth detention center in which he would stay until he turned 19, when he would gain probation. It was determined in trial that Jarrell had to get psychological treatment while in detention in order to be rehabilitated. That didn't work, however, since Jarrell continued to have troubles with the law and involved himself with sketchy people. For instance, he managed to escape once in 2019 to South Dakota and ended up being charged with rape afterwards. Nowadays, he's facing prison as an adult in South Dakota, and there isn't much information on how much longer he'll be in there. Nehemiah Griego. Every single teenager who has ever lived already had an argument with their parents. It's an age where we are definitely more rebellious against the whole world in general, with our families playing a great role in this package. It's a normal thing while growing up, and also to straighten up and get a better understanding of ourselves and the relationships we mold around us. But could you imagine one day waking up and deciding to put an end to it? I mean, murdering your whole family. That's what happened to 5 members of the Griego family on January 19th, 2013. The parents, Sarah and Greg, and their younger children, Zephaniah, Jael, and Angelina, with 9, 5, and 2 years old respectively, were brutally murdered by the eldest son, 15-year-old Nehemiah. The Griegos, known as being the so-called traditional family, had a pretty disturbing end coming to them. Earlier in his life, Greg actually had quite a hard time, growing up in a poor family among gangs, drugs, and criminals. He was even arrested in the early 1990s. It was during this time, however, where he was transformed, and he decided to become a Christian. From then on, he worked as a jail minister for years at the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There, Greg was determined to raise a traditional family himself. For that reason, Greg and his wife Sarah were very strict parents. Since they were very little, the children were involved in the church community and weren't allowed to date until they were much older. Greg also kept guns in the house for safety and taught the kids how to use them, claiming that he had to be prepared in case of burglary. Because of this conduct, Greg was described by neighbors as pretty much a tyrant who always kept his children under some kind of pressure, demanding a lot from them and not giving much love back. That might be a factor that could help us understand what happened on the 19th of January 2013. It was nighttime when Nehemiah picked up his father's .22 caliber rifle and went into his parents' bedroom. Since Greg was working, Nehemiah only found his mother sleeping. The boy aimed the gun and shot his own mother in the head. He then took a picture of the scene and sent it to his secret 12-year-old girlfriend, while Zephaniah, awoken by the sound of the gunshot, headed towards his parents' bedroom, asking Nehemiah what was going on. Nehemiah then calmly informed him that he just shot their mother. When Zephaniah responded saying he didn't believe him, Nehemiah lifted his mother's head and showed it to his little brother, who unsurprisingly became very upset, resulting in Nehemiah shooting him twice in the head. His next stop was in his little sister's bedroom, where he did the exact same thing to them, coldly taking their lives with 2 shots to the head. At that point, Greg was the only target left. Nehemiah then switched weapons, picking up an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, and waited for his father to arrive home to finish the massacre. It was around 5 a.m. when Greg came home from his night shift. Nehemiah didn't shoot him on sight, however. He cruelly took his time to let Greg walk around the house and witness what was happening. Only then did Nehemiah give him the same fate that he gave his mother and siblings. After that, according to investigators, the boy originally wanted to murder more people in a more populated area, like a Walmart, to eventually die in a shootout with the police, as the reloaded AR-15 and .22 caliber rifle placed in the family's minivan alongside more ammo suggested. However, at some point, he changed his mind and decided to drive to the local church to meet his girlfriend. He told her to tell people that his family died in a car accident, even though she knew the truth. But later that afternoon, Pastor Justin Marbury felt something was off, since there was no sign of the always present Griego family around, and Nehemiah was acting odd. Marbury then asked what was going on, and once Nehemiah said his family was apparently dead, but couldn't explain why he didn't tell that to the authorities, the pastor immediately notified the police. police. Police officer Vince Harrison was certain Nehemiah had something to do with the crime, and then drove with the boy and the pastor, Marbury, to the Griego house, where they were shocked by the crime scene they were being forced to witness. Nehemiah was then arrested and admitted to the murders, adding calmly that he had thoughts of taking his own life, and, of course, other people's too. He said he killed his mother due to an argument they had the night before that made him irritated, and that he wanted to keep going, but something simply made him, luckily, take a step back. At the end, Nehemiah was trialed as an adult and given 3 life sentences, and another 7 years for killing his family, despite his aunt's attempts to put her nephew in a professional mental health care facility instead. But I guess we can say that justice was served, as there is one less criminal wandering around our streets. Nonetheless, we can only hope there'll be some kind of redemption for him in the future. Tyler Hadley. Is there anything better than going to a house party to drink, chill, and have a good time with your friends? Probably not, except if the host happens to be Tyler Hadley. While his classmates were trying to relax and have fun, Tyler was hiding a brutal and horrifying secret from everyone, right under their noses. This gruesome story took place in the quiet city of Port St. Lucie in Florida in the summer of 2011. Blake Hadley and his wife Mary Jo moving in 1983. 4 years later, they had their first son, Ryan. And 6 years after that, on December 16th, their second son, Tyler Hadley, was born. At first sight, the Hadleys were the typical family with a bright future ahead. When he was a little kid, Tyler was often described by his neighbors as a respectful young boy who had a really close relationship with his parents, as a seemingly very happy kid who was always in a good mood. However, when Tyler was around 6, he started showing symptoms of mild depression, a condition that Mary Jo suffered from. As an overprotective mom worried about her son's well-being, a few years later, when Tyler was 10, he started taking the antidepressant Lexapro, which might sound to some like a drastic decision, taking into account the medication's many side effects. However, Tyler's signs of depression only worsened by the age of 15, which led him to also being prescribed Adderall, a stimulant for ADHD, Prozac, another antidepressant and hormone medication. However, Tyler's problems only seemed to keep adding up, as he was now bulimic with a low self-esteem at the age of 16. It is true that when Tyler entered high school, he started to be considered as being eccentric, unpredictable, and troubled, starting to get involved in a few incidents, such as setting fire to an abandoned couch and almost setting an entire nature preservation area on fire. That was when Mary Jo realized that she had lost control of her son. He started to take other medication that was prescribed to him and started to mix it with alcohol and illegal drugs, which didn't exactly resolve his troubling behavior, much to the contrary. Tyler got arrested for getting in a fight with a friend and some theft, and as a result, his mother confiscated his phone, which added a layer of anger and stress to the boy, who slowly started to hate not only his own mother, but seemingly anyone that stood in his way. On the 16th of July 2011, a sunny summer Saturday, Tyler decided to host a huge party. He kept telling his friends that he would be throwing a rager, but no one thought it would actually happen, given Tyler's recent troubles. However, Tyler was determined to make it happen, not letting anyone, including his parents, stop him. So, around 11 a.m., Tyler posted a message on his Facebook wall officializing the event without warning his parents about it. Around 5 p.m., several hours before the party, Tyler started to prepare his house for his celebration. He got some ecstasy, went to the garage to get a hammer, and headed towards his mom, who was working on the computer. Tyler stood behind her, and when she turned to face him, he hit her right on her head. Mary Jo started to scream, alarming Blake, who rushed to the room and saw the horrifying scene. Blake asked Tyler why he was doing that, as he replied, "Why the hell not?" and then bludgeoned his own father to death. Following that, Tyler struck his mom once again to effectively kill her and dragged both their bodies to their bedroom, hiding them under a pile of clothing and furniture. After that, Tyler locked the bedroom door and cleaned the house for hours, finishing just in time for his guests to arrive. Around 60 kids attended Tyler's party that night, making sure to celebrate by drinking, playing beer pong, smoking, and trashing the house, as many of them didn't really know Tyler, so had no problem messing up the place. Some youngsters remember sitting at the computer, choosing which songs to play on YouTube, and noticing a brown and sticky substance on the computer table, which seemed to them to be some spilled Coke or beer. Little did they know that was actually Mary Jo's blood, which Tyler couldn't quite get rid of. The party kept going, and Tyler was in a mix of panic, fear, joy, and excitement. At some point, he told his best friend Michael Mandel what happened. Tyler detailed everything to him, and even took him to his parents' bedroom to see the bodies. Michael was obviously traumatized and in utter shock. He left the party and called the police while Tyler carried on drinking, smoking, and laughing with strangers. At around 4:40 a.m., the police arrived and found the bodies of Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, arresting Tyler on the spot. When questioned about his motivations, Tyler's explanations varied. First, he blamed his medications, then implied that Blake was abusive and not his real father, only to later admit that he wanted to throw a party, but knew his parents would object to it. Eventually, Tyler ended up being charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life with no chance of parole. That's what I call a bad ending. Eric Smith. On August 2nd, 1993, a gruesome event took place in the small village of Savona, New York, by surprise. The small and safe community would never be the same after that fateful day when little Derek Roby was cruelly murdered. It was school break, meaning that Savona Village Park would be holding a day camp which many local children would attend. Derek, just like any other kid in the community, had no problem walking alone to the camp without being followed by an adult, even though he was only 4 years old. So, on that 2nd of August, Derek walked fiercely towards the camp. His mother used to watch him heading to the park in the distance and meeting up with the other children. But because that day Derek's little brother Dalton was sick, she had to take care of him and couldn't quite keep an eye on Derek. The weather forecast that day was stating there would be thunderstorms, meaning that fewer children would go to camp, and consequently, that Derek made the last part of his journey to the park all alone. But that didn't worry him, as Derek was very bright for his age and knew he should stay on the pavement and wasn't supposed to talk to or go with strangers. At 9:15 a.m., a local man passed Derek, and shortly after, another kid named Eric Smith. Eric was a 13-year-old boy who lived less than a mile away from Derek with his mom Tammy, his sister Stacy, and his stepfather Ted. But since they knew each other from around the village and summer camp, Derek had no problem interacting with him. Eric approached Derek and started to talk to him, trying to lure him to go to the wooded area right by the road, saying that it was a shortcut to the park. Derek refused, as Eric continued to insist. It was only when Eric said that by going through the shortcut that they would arrive before the other kids and beat them there that Derek agreed. But at 9:30 a.m., Eric arrived at the park alone, and only an hour later, the thunderstorm struck the area, canceling the camp that day. When Derek's mom came to pick him up, she was told Derek didn't show up that day. Around 11 a.m., Derek was reported missing. The police were called and local people teamed up to look for the boy. And at 3:45 p.m., Derek was finally found in a lightly wooded area, just off the street between the camp and his house. The sight was absolutely revolting and shattered the entire community. Derek had been strangled and beaten to death. At the start of the investigations, the police looked for the suspects, such as the guy that passed with the truck before Eric showed up, and outside investigators were brought in to work on the case alongside the local police. Derek was buried 5 days later, on the 7th of August, and about 700 people attended to pay their respects, proving that the village was truly devastated by the loss of the boy. By that time, the police announced that the killer appeared to be someone inside the community. A day after the funeral, Eric's grandfather, who was a retired sheriff, started to notice some divergence in his grandson's story about what happened on the day of the murder, and realized that Eric must be involved. He immediately took Eric to the police station, where Eric confessed to have murdered Derek. He said he was riding his bike along to camp when he saw Derek walking towards the same direction and stopped to talk to him. He told them about how he tried to convince Derek to take the shortcut and claimed that once they were in the woods, Eric choked the boy and hit him multiple times with a small rock. After that, he took a larger rock that must have weighed about 12 kilos and dropped it on Derek's head, smashing his skull. He then continued to throw rocks at Derek's body and opened his lunchbox. He picked up a napkin and stuffed it in Derek's mouth, only to later pour Kool-Aid over his head. And if all of that wasn't disturbing enough, he finished poor Derek off by taking a twig from a tree and sodomizing his body. After this horrendous scene, Eric calmly returned to his bike and headed to the park. But shortly after, he decided to go back to check if Derek was truly dead, and only then did he go back to the camp. As soon as Eric finished his confession, he was held at the Monroe County Children's Center and awaited trial. On September 5th, Eric was charged with second-degree murder, and it was confirmed that he would go on trial as an adult. The defense tried and insisted to get the trial moved to family court, where Eric would have a lighter sentence if convicted, under the narrative and attempting the reason of insanity. But all endeavors were unsuccessful. The case went to trial on the 26th of July 1994, and the discussion around wasn't asking if Eric had killed Derek or not, but his mental state at the moment of the murder. The thing with Eric was that he was indeed a good student and a fairly polite boy, but was a bit mischievous at times, and known for having a bad temper, and having a testimony from a psychiatrist that diagnosed the boy with intermittent explosive disorder. This is a behavior characterized by uncontrollable rage and explosive bursts of anger and violence, in which whoever suffers from it doesn't have any control or responsibility over his actions.
Smith suffers from a mental disease that can be characterized as a rage disorder. He builds up inside himself, from whatever sources produce anger, he builds up rage. And it doesn't express itself, and then the rage explodes.
The true motif of this mental illness Eric suffers from was never really explained, but it might have been worsened or stimulated by a few facts, such as his mother taking Tridione while she was pregnant with Eric, a drug known for causing developmental abnormalities to the fetus, a troubled household in which him and his sister were sometimes verbally and physically abused by his stepfather, and the fact that he was a victim of bullying at school due to his red hair, his big glasses, freckles, speech problems, and learning difficulties. Shortly after, a few previous incidents in which Eric was involved started to show up, like once when he was caught setting fire to a pile of paperwork in the kitchen at 3 years old, or when he strangled a neighbor's cat because he found the animal bothersome. After all the evidence, it was decided on the 16th of August 1994 that Eric was guilty of second-degree murder, and on the 7th of November was given the maximum sentence for his crime, 9 years to life in prison, with a chance of parole every 2 years. Eric spent many years in a juvenile facility to later be moved to a maximum security prison in which he caused various infractions. As time went by, Eric was constantly denied parole 10 separate times. On his 11th hearing in October 2021, he was granted parole and became a free man on the 1st of February 2022 at the age of 41. And those were some of the scariest and most dangerous children in the world. If you like this content, click on one of the cards on the screen to watch similar videos. See you there.